Historical vandalism. That's what Congressman Jonathan Jackson called it. He wasn't exaggerating. The removal of panels honoring Black World War II soldiers from Margraten Cemetery isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a coordinated campaign to erase Black military history from official American memory. And we now have the documents that prove it's happening across multiple institutions, following a clear pattern driven by explicit political directives from the top. Congressman Jackson's statement came after new reporting revealed that the Heritage Foundation pressured the American Battle Monuments Commission to remove the Margraten panels. Jackson didn't hold back. It is unconscionable that any administration would seek to erase the sacrifice of Black soldiers who fought, bled, and died to defend democracy around the world. These men helped defeat fascism abroad while enduring segregation and discrimination at home. To strip their memory from sacred ground is not only disrespectful, it is historical vandalism. He's calling for congressional hearings to investigate how U.S. historical representations overseas are not manipulated by partisan or ideological pressures. Because Margraten isn't the only place this is happening. It's a pattern, and the pattern reveals something chilling about what's being systematically erased from American military history. Let's map out what's actually happening. March 2025. The same month, the Margraten panels disappeared. Arlington National Cemetery, the most sacred burial ground in American military history, quietly removes references to Black and female service members from its website. Content that had been there for years, telling the stories of barrier-breaking military figures, simply vanished. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. The removals at Arlington weren't small edits. They eliminated historical content about the integration of the military, about Black soldiers who broke racial barriers, about women who served when the military tried to keep them out. These were educational resources that helped visitors understand the full scope of American military history. The ABMC claimed they were updating content, but updating means replacing old information with new information. This was deletion without replacement. This was erasure. Also in March, the Pentagon removed a web page celebrating Major General Charles Calvin Rogers. Rogers was a Black Vietnam veteran who received the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism. His story was prominently featured on Pentagon websites as an example of American military valor. Then it disappeared. Only after public outcry, after veterans groups and historians demanded answers, did the Pentagon quietly restore the page. But the fact that it was removed at all tells you everything about the intent. These three incidents, all in March 2025, all involving recognition of Black military service, aren't coincidences. The Freedom of Information Act emails from the Margraten case prove these decisions were coordinated responses to Trump administration pressure. The subject line, Foreign DEI, makes it explicit. Officials were systematically reviewing any content that acknowledged racial discrimination or celebrated Black service members, flagging it as problematic, and removing it to avoid raising any ire of the administration. But the erasure goes deeper than websites and memorial panels. It's affecting how the military trains its own personnel about its history. In April 2025, the Defense Department ordered a review of all military education materials to identify and remove content related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That sounds administrative until you understand what it means in practice. It means removing lessons about the Tuskegee Airmen from Air Force training. It means eliminating discussions of military integration from officer candidate schools. It means taking the history of the Buffalo Soldiers out of Army education programs. These aren't DEI initiatives. These are American military history. The Tuskegee Airmen earned one of the best combat records of World War II, despite facing systemic racism. The Buffalo Soldiers served with distinction for decades despite discrimination. The integration of the military in 1948 was one of the most significant civil rights achievements in American history. But under the guise of eliminating DEI programs, the administration is eliminating the teaching of these historical facts. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has been explicit about his goals. In public statements and interviews, He's argued that focusing on discrimination and inequality in military history is divisive and undermines unit cohesion. He's suggested that telling stories about racism faced by black service members somehow dishonors the military as an institution. This is the same argument segregationists made in the 1940s when they opposed integrating the armed forces. They claimed that acknowledging racial problems would hurt morale and unit effectiveness. History proved them catastrophically wrong. Integrated units performed better, not worse. Truth strengthened the military. Lies weakened it. What makes this current erasure particularly insidious is the language being used to justify it. Officials claim they're not removing black history, just rotating exhibits, or updating content, or streamlining education programs. But the pattern is unmistakable. Content that acknowledges racism disappears. Content that celebrates black achievement vanishes. Content that tells uncomfortable truths about discrimination gets flagged as problematic. Meanwhile, content about white military leaders, about conventional heroism narratives, about victories that don't complicate the story, remains untouched. The Heritage Foundation's role in this campaign reveals how coordinated it is. Heritage, one of the most influential conservative think tanks in Washington, has been systematically identifying what they call woke content in federal agencies and demanding its removal. They've published reports listing specific exhibits, websites, and educational materials they want eliminated. The Margraten panels appeared on one of their lists. So did the Arlington content. So did educational materials at service academies. Heritage frames this as removing political activism from government institutions. But there's nothing political about stating that the U.S. military was segregated during World War II. That's a fact. There's nothing activist about explaining that black soldiers faced discrimination while serving. That's history. What Heritage is actually demanding is the removal of any acknowledgement that racism existed in American institutions, including the military. They want a sanitized version of history that pretends these problems never existed. And the Trump administration is complying, not just at the margins, but systematically across multiple agencies. The ABMC, Arlington, the Pentagon, the Defense Department's Education Division, all acting in concert to remove the same types of content, all using similar justifications, all happening at the same time, following the same executive orders about DEI programs. The implications go beyond just memorial panels and websites. This erasure affects how future service members understand their own institution. When you remove the history of discrimination from military education, you remove the context for why policies like integration mattered. You remove the understanding of why the military needed to change. You remove the lessons that were learned through painful experience about the costs of racism and the benefits of equality. Young officers entering the service today won't learn about the systematic injustices faced by black service members in previous generations. They won't understand the fights that were fought to integrate units, to allow black officers to command white troops, to give black soldiers the same opportunities as their white peers. They'll be taught a version of military history that suggests everything was always fine, that the military was always a meritocracy, that race never mattered, all of which are demonstrably false. This matters because the military is one of America's most trusted institutions. When the military teaches history, people believe it. When the military honors service members, that recognition carries weight. When the military erases black contributions from its own narrative, it sends a message about whose service matters and whose doesn't. It tells current black service members that their predecessors' struggles and achievements aren't worth remembering. It tells the country that black military history is optional, expendable, something that can be removed when it becomes politically inconvenient. The families of black service members are watching this happen in real time. Janice Wiggins saw her late husband's story removed from Margraten after she fought to get it installed. Descendants of the Tuskegee Airmen are watching their ancestors' achievements get stripped from Air Force education materials. Families of Buffalo soldiers are seeing their relatives' service erased from Army historical programs. These aren't abstract policy debates. These are personal acts of disrespect to people who sacrificed for their country. And it's not just families. Veterans groups have been increasingly vocal about these erasures. The Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., an organization of surviving members and descendants, issued a statement condemning the removal of their history from military education. They pointed out that these weren't diversity programs. They were historical facts about American military aviation. The Buffalo Soldiers National Museum in Houston has been documenting the systematic removal of Buffalo Soldiers content from Defense Department materials. They've counted dozens of instances where references to black cavalry units have been eliminated from official histories. What Jackson called historical vandalism is the right term. Vandalism is the deliberate destruction of something valuable. That's exactly what's happening. The historical record of black military service is valuable. It's valuable to the families of those who served. It's valuable to current service members who need to understand their institution's full history. It's valuable to the country as a record of how America has struggled with and sometimes overcome its racial demons. And it's being deliberately destroyed for political purposes. The FROIA emails from Margraten show officials weren't even trying to hide their motivations. They were worried about getting in trouble with the administration. They were preemptively removing content to avoid raising any ire. This wasn't about historical accuracy or space limitations or educational priorities. This was about political fear. Officials censored history because they were afraid of political consequences. That fear is spreading throughout federal agencies. Museum curators are being told to review exhibits for problematic content. Park Service historians are being instructed to remove references to racism from site interpretations. National Archives staff are being pressured to reclassify materials about civil rights and racial justice. The chilling effect is enormous. Even when content isn't explicitly ordered removed, officials are self-censoring to avoid scrutiny. Jackson's call for congressional hearings is essential because this pattern needs to be documented and stopped. Congress needs to investigate who gave the orders, who made the lists of content to remove, who decided that black military history was expendable. Congress needs to mandate that removed content be restored. Congress needs to create protections to prevent future administrations from politically manipulating historical presentations. But even if hearings happen, even if some content is restored, the damage is already done. Thousands of visitors have already walked through Arlington without learning about black service members' contributions. Thousands of students have already completed military education programs without learning about integration and discrimination. The Margraten panels have been in storage for 9 months, while visitors to that cemetery remain ignorant of who actually built it and buried the dead. And there's no guarantee this gets reversed. Charles Duju's email suggested keeping the Margraten panels in storage until a new admin in 2029. That assumes Trump leaves office then. It assumes the next administration will want to restore what was removed. It assumes 4 years of erasure is acceptable as long as it's eventually corrected. But some damage can't be undone. The visitors who already missed learning these stories won't come back. The students who already completed their education without this history won't retake the courses. What we're witnessing is an attempt to fundamentally reshape how America remembers black military service, not through honest historical revision based on new evidence, but through political censorship based on ideological discomfort. The Trump administration and its allies at Heritage are trying to create a version of military history where racism either didn't exist or didn't matter, where black service members either didn't contribute significantly or their contributions don't need special recognition, where the struggles for equality and integration were unnecessary distractions rather than essential progress. This revisionism serves a clear political purpose. If you can convince people that racism wasn't really a problem in American institutions, you can argue that current efforts to address racial inequality are unnecessary. If you can erase the history of discrimination in the military, you can claim that complaints about ongoing disparities are unfounded. If you can remove the record of how hard previous generations had to fight for equal treatment, you can suggest that current demands for equity are excessive. But the historical record exists whether or not it's displayed at Arlington or Margraten or taught at military academies. The documents, the testimonies, the photographs, the combat records, all of it remains. Jefferson Wiggins described burying bodies of white soldiers who wouldn't have sat in the same room with him while alive. That testimony exists. George H. Pruitt drowned saving a fellow soldier. That death is recorded. The 965th Quartermaster Service Company built Margraten Cemetery. That fact is documented. You can remove the panels that tell these stories, but you can't erase the truth of what happened. What you can do is make it harder for people to learn that truth. You can remove it from the places where millions of visitors would encounter it. You can eliminate it from the education programs that train military officers. You can strip it from the websites that students and researchers use. You can make it something that requires specific effort to discover, rather than something that's presented as part of the standard narrative. And that's what this campaign of erasure is designed to do. Congressman Jackson ended his statement with a promise. The story of the Black liberators of Margraten will not be erased, not on my watch, and not on behalf of the people I serve. That's the fight now. Preventing the erasure, demanding the restoration, ensuring that Black military history remains part of America's official memory. Because once you let history be erased for political convenience, there's no limit to what can be removed. Today it's panels about segregation and discrimination. Tomorrow it might be any acknowledgement that racism existed at all. The line has to be drawn now, while the documents proving this erasure still exist, while the witnesses are still alive to testify, while the damage can still be partially undone. This isn't about diversity programs or political correctness or divisive narratives. This is about whether America will honestly acknowledge its own history, including the uncomfortable parts, or whether we'll allow political pressure to reshape that history into something more palatable but less true. Right now, the Trump administration has chosen political comfort over historical truth, and Black service members, living and dead, are paying the price for that choice.